Okay, so next we'd like to draw your attention to this lovely QR code, the black and white square box on your screen. If you take your phones out and you open your camera and you click it, it should center on the square box and it will open a link tree where we have included some resources about International Women's Day and Women's Month. So if you're interested, please feel free to scan that and it will take you there. We'll also show it at the end. All right. So we're gathered here today on Aniskwaci, Waskahikan, traditional Treaty 6 territory of First Nations and the Métis Nation of Alberta Zone 4. We respectfully acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this land for centuries, including the Cree, Nehia, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota, Blackfoot, as well as the Métis and Inuit. This land is and has been a welcoming place for all peoples who come to Edmonton and call it home. It's a place built for community, trade, friendship, and shared understanding. We recognize those Indigenous peoples who are still fighting for equality today, and we support them in the spirit of decolonization and reconciliation. We remain committed to honoring the struggle of our Indigenous siblings and joining with them to end injustice. Together, we call upon all of our collective honored traditions and ancestors to help us work together in the spirit of community and understanding today and onwards. So why do we do treaty acknowledgements? We are all treaty people. Long ago, when the first settlers came to this land, they drafted treaties that Indigenous people signed in goodwill and with good faith. Those settlers and settlers up until today have not always honored those treaties. The treaties were meant to honor the traditional land and way of life of the Indigenous peoples, to ensure their rights and prosperity, and to build understanding and mutual cooperation. Today, we acknowledge treaty land as a way to recommit to honoring the spirit of those treaties and to recognize the continued rights of Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land. We recognize that many Indigenous peoples have been dispossessed of their land and traditional ways of life and the prosperity that came along with it. We acknowledge the treaty to understand we each have a role to play as treaty people in reconciliation and in righting historical wrongs that have taken place. We would also like to invite you to share your land acknowledgements based on the treaty land that you are on in the chat box below. So just feel free. So a little bit about us. Since its establishment in 1993, the Centre for Race and Culture, CFRAC, formerly known as the Northern Alberta Alliance on Race Relations, NAR, has brought together diverse people with an interest in promoting and supporting individual, collective, and systemic change to address discrimination and racism and to encourage intercultural understanding. Taking an intersectional approach, our expertise spans workplace development, community building, research, and education. If you'd like to learn more about our current events, projects, or activities, please visit our website, cfrac.com, and sign up for our newsletter. A little bit about this roundtable series. This session is part of a new initiative called Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations, an ongoing series of online moderated roundtables and webinars with guest speakers from diverse communities, organizations, academia, and the general public. We seek to understand and address experiences of discrimination and exclusion in the Canadian context. By shining the spotlight on different forms of discrimination, such as anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and discrimination against Asian communities, amongst many other topics, we hope to encourage solidarity among groups and individuals interested in promoting social inclusion and equity. We have an upcoming session on anti-racism practices in education on March 30th, 2022 from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. We'd love to see you there. Next, we are going to launch some anonymous polls. Yes, we're going to launch some anonymous demographic polls on your screen. You don't have to answer, but it does help us to know our audience better. So I'll just give a moment, about a minute for that, and then we'll go onwards. There's just 6 questions. It doesn't take very long, but again, you don't have to answer, but it is anonymous, so we never know. Just tells us 3 people have answered, 5 people have answered, things like that. Awesome, thank you for answering, you guys. I see that the scale is moving, telling us that people are answering the questions. We really appreciate it. We'll just take about 25 more seconds. 6 questions, it takes a little bit to read and get through them. Awesome, thank you, thank you. All right, I'm gonna just give you 5 more seconds if you just want to answer, and then we'll go on. Okay, great. So next, I would like to introduce you to our speakers for this evening, starting with Adetoun Aiyeleye. At the forefront of women's advocacy and product design for niche markets, you'll find Adetoun Aiyeleye. Her 15+ years of community work and business footprints trail across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and North America. A recipient of multiple honors and awards, Abby's lived experiences and qualifications continue to fuel her drive to deliver undeniably fit-for-purpose products and services. She contributes to the ecosystem by advising the Edmonton Innovation Growth Council, engaging in women and youth mentorship, and sitting on not-for-profit boards with missions across business and community support. As co-founder of Clavis Studio, Abby is redefining the approach to interior design using immersive 3D technology that showcases the immeasurable possibilities of the metaverse in design and infrastructure planning, pardon me. Her goal is to drive tech adoption in traditional or less predictable sectors and to promote a tech-driven economy by creating jobs and expanding market access for Clavis-powered businesses. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Funke Olokude. Funke is an energetic and innovative human working to continuously deliver cutting-edge collaborative practice by leading from the margins to promote a holistic approach to issues impacting individuals, systems, and policies to bring about transformative and equitable change. She is an intercultural relationship facilitator and educator working to highlight the complex intersecting realities of vulnerable and marginalized individuals and families. Funke has over 15 years of extensive work experience in the social service industry, working with diverse populations and sectors in Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta, where she has continuously promoted equity in policy and practice that have led to transformational relationships between individuals and within systems. In 2020, Funke was named Top 40 Under 40 for her continued work in influencing policy and practice across various sectors in Alberta. She is the current executive director of the Ribbon Rouge Foundation and the co-founder of Hexagon Wellness Solutions. Finally, I'd like to introduce you to Mansouri Madares. Mansouri Madares is the senior consultant at the Center for Race and Culture. Mansouri holds a PhD from the University of Alberta with a focus on community, intersectionality, and transnational feminisms and storytelling. She joined our team in January 2020 and is working as our senior consultant, overseeing CFRAC consulting services and developing the educational programs such as Gender Inclusivity in the Workplace, a practical guide, and Challenging Discrimination through Community Conversations. Mansouri is committed to raising awareness about social issues and fostering inclusive practices. This is our panel for this evening. Thank you for your attention. I'd just like to remind you that you can use the chat or the Q&A button to ask our panel questions. I'll now hand the event off to Mansouri and our wonderful speakers.
Thanks so much, Serafina. And yeah, good evening, everyone. It's very nice to have you here and joining our 2 speakers for today, Adetoun and Funke. So yeah, we will get us started. So before we get started with the questions, just sharing a few things. So we shared a Q&R code. We'll share it again, hopefully at the end. And so you can learn more about International Women's Day through those links. If there are other links, other resources in the community that you would like to share with us, please do so. And we'll continue to add those to the link tree that we've created. And so this year, the theme for International Women's Day is breaking down bias. right? And you can see that on many different platforms. For instance, you can, of course, see it. We'll talk to our speakers about this, but you would definitely see that in the values, equity, inclusiveness, and equality. So that we can have a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination. The UN, the United Nations, actually has called this, introduced this year as Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. And again, there is a link that you can learn more about this. And the theme that has been adopted by the Canadian government this year is that is women inspiring women. And so it would be women inspiring, as the president of this association says, inspiring governments to take action on issues affecting Canadian women. All right, so having gone over these few points, let's get started with the first question, which is, what are some barriers that women continue to face in Canada that prevent full equality? So let's get started with Funke.
Sure, thanks, Mansuri, and thanks everyone, welcome. I can't see people, but I know people are out there, so it's nice to have space to just jam on our, I guess, Wednesday evening. So thank you for being here, and hopefully we can have great conversations this evening. But just thinking about the first question, when we talk about equality, right? Equality is a very interesting word, because when you talk about equality, you think we're all starting from the same place, and for me, I think the major barrier, and I was just sort of reflecting and thinking about all the chatter online everywhere yesterday for International Women's Day. And it's this idea that in Canada, even in Alberta, in Edmonton, we often think that women are very homogeneous, right? We're a homogeneous group, and we're all the same. And that idea of homogeneity and sort of like some of the issues we face also stems from some feminist ideologies at the same time, which is very white, middle-class centered issues. But when we start to talk about barriers that people face, we need to start looking at the issues from an intersectional lens, pretty much. Okay, for example, I am a Black woman, but my experiences are also quite different from a Black woman that wears a hijab, and we've seen some of those things happen in Edmonton, even in very recent times, right? So when we talk about full equality, I think for me, the gap is, are we all starting from the same place? And how are we defining equality? Because equality does not mean the same thing for all women, especially now where gender is also quite fluid and diverse as well. So think about transgender women as well. So what does equality mean for a transgender woman versus what does equality mean for a white, straight, middle-class woman, right? So I think when we start to have the conversations from those extremes, we'll definitely get to a point where we get to the middle, and then we can sort of like support everyone's needs, everyone's issues as well. So just reflecting on your question, that's what came. It was more questions for me rather than answers, right? And I think that's where some of the barriers come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes so much sense. Thanks so much for sharing that, because you're absolutely right. When we're talking about this gender category, woman, right, there's so much plurality within that, right? And it's very important to recognize that and just think about the differences, the different experiences that exist there, right? So in our conversation, we'll try to highlight the experiences of our speakers and of course people that you've been in contact with, but yeah, it goes beyond that. There are so many different intersections, right, that could be looked at specifically when it comes to category of woman as a gender identity. Thanks so much, Funke. So yeah, you can come back to the idea of, again, any other barriers that you may think of. But let's hear from Adetoun what she thinks about the first question.
Yeah, I agree with Funke. It's interesting that, you know, the simplest tasks different people would do it in different ways based on their knowledge or, you know, their experience. And so for me, from a startup perspective, that equality would be what kind of resources are women accessing and what kind of results are they getting. So, you know, some of the barriers that you face as a startup, as a Black woman in startup, would be maybe not even knowing that there are grants out there that you could apply for, or you see some of the requirements for it and you think, nah, I'm not going to get it. So you give up. Or you don't even know that there are programs out there that you could participate in to learn more about being a startup and how to leverage your network. So really, it goes back to what Funke said. How do we even start from a level playing field before we start to get to the end result? And these barriers are showing in numbers. We have more people participating in surveys now, which is awesome. We know that there's lots of women businesses out there that are struggling to get funding. We know that about 90% of women founders are not even participating in accelerator programs. A lot of government grants, 0.01% go to women, Black women especially, and a lot of percentages around just evidence that equality is not even on the table at all when it comes to being a startup founder, being a Black woman startup founder. And one interesting survey that I saw recently by the 51 is that apparently when there's a loan listing with a Black person on the profile picture, there's about 25 to 35% chance that they're not going to receive funding. So how do you combat that? How do you even know that that's a problem until, you know, someone brings it up or someone does a survey or someone's implicit bias shows?
Absolutely. That's such an important point. I was just thinking of the time that I was working at a public sector. So I was the status of women ministry of the time. Well, we don't have it in that capacity anymore, I think. But then a lot of good efforts, right, were being made in the time that ministry was in power. But you're absolutely right. So the fact that we do not collect race-based data as much as we can, and I think this is a point that came up in our conversation in our Black History Month session 2 weeks ago, that this is so important. If we do not know who is out there and what needs they have, right? What startups, for instance, are, out there, and who is in need of receiving that funding, receiving those resources, we cannot engage with them, we cannot find them, we cannot target them, right? So yeah, that's so important to know about those intersections, right? And to make sure that we are trying to engage them, we are trying to learn more about them in order to reach them in a more equitable way, right? So as you suggested, it's not just when it comes to racialized women, being a woman is the first intersection for them, right? And there comes a lot of other factors, as Funke also suggested. For instance, if you're talking about a woman of color, right? Or you're talking about a woman of color who is, for instance, a Muslim woman, right? So all these would be factors and categories there that would need research, would need work, right? In order to do more, to reach them in a more efficient way. All right, so the next question that we have here is, what are we doing as a community to challenge the gender gap? So this could be looked at from your positions. I know that both of you have had extensive experience in the community, right? And just thinking about what are we doing, right, to highlight those and maybe take it from there. What can be done more? We can talk about that later. But yeah, let's continue with Adetoun, and then we'll Go to Funke.
I think the past few years have been exciting. We've seen more, well, in the startup world, that's always my world. We've seen more women as venture capitalists, angel investors. We've seen organizations like the 51, they're my favorite. We've seen organizations like BKR Capital, where, more women are stepping up to support women founders, or to provide funding for women founders, just to really try to lessen the gap a little bit more. So that's exciting. And we're seeing organizations do more survey and research to, put information out there so people can make better decisions as well. And I think really taking it, a little bit more personal. It's calling out biases when we hear it, not letting things slide, point out things that are pretty obvious that need to change, or just making a little bit more efforts to, acknowledge things that are not either worded properly or are not allotted properly.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So yes, one point as just knowing about when something like that is happening, right? There was this short video, I think it was like a TED video, which was about the fact that we need to flag that behavior, right? Or that action whenever it happens. And sometimes it happens in the form of a call out or a call in, right? But what they were suggesting was actually a very, very practical way of doing that, just by, for instance, having sort of an imaginary purple flag, right? So that whenever something happens, someone is talking, someone is working on, something, and maybe subconsciously, maybe unconsciously, something unintentionally happens. By saying that, we are trying to make them see, right, that something happened. And then maybe later you would have an opportunity to actually talk things over, right, and explain why, what happened, how to do things better. But yeah, that is a very important point, especially in regard to this year's theme, right, which is to break up biases. Funke, what would you like to add?
No, yeah, I think you've both made great points. Yeah, it's kind of like the bystander effect, and just getting to a place whereby we're getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? And creating space to name things. Like, we really need to get there, because most of the things that create a gap are sort of like very invincible, very subtle, underneath. But getting to a space whereby we can actually name things and call things out as they happen, right? But it's interesting as well. I saw a news article yesterday where, chiming back and tying it back to what Abby was saying, where the government of Alberta is actually committing $1 million to support women in STEM courses, I think in 3 post-secondary institutions across Alberta. That's great, that's good. But I think a thing like that would be nice, and will have better impact to close this gap if those interventions are done earlier on. Because oftentimes we struggle to see women, and that's why I applaud women like Abby who are in that space, right? Because we're not socialized to be in that space. So it's nice, it's great to give $1 million to women at the post-secondary level, but how many women are there right now? Whereas we could spend most of that money earlier on to socialize girls to see themselves in that space. So I think we're doing things to close the gap, but we need to, for lack of a better word, catch them early and start to target some of these interventions earlier, because we socialize girls to become women. So how are we socializing our girls, and how are they seeing themselves in society as full-grown women? So there's lots that we're doing, very subtle things, small things and big things, like committing funding, but maybe some of it has to be done earlier as well.
Yeah, allocating funding, right? And perhaps a good monitoring of, how it is being allocated, how is it being used, right? Which communities are actually benefiting from that, which goes back about the importance of race-based data, right? And especially at places where you see a lot of different intersections. For instance, women working in STEM fields, right? That's another whole intersection, right? Added to all the layers, right? So absolutely, it's so important to identify those issues and engage them more, right? I think that's the best way, basically, in order for them to have a voice at the table and be heard, so that we can actually learn about those problems. We have a question in the chat box. I'm not sure if you would like to answer it at this point, which is, what is the biggest challenge women face in the workforce? And you can, of course, talk about your own experiences or whatever you are in contact with at this point, if you feel comfortable.
I can talk about it a little bit. So I think the first thing that there's this quiet assumption that women in the workplace have other commitments. So when you're being assigned a project, or when you're being assigned a particular role that is seen to take a lot of time and effort, you are almost considered second place. Because then they're almost thinking for you that, oh yeah, you got to go to a family. Do you have kids, or do you need to do other things? Are you going to be able to be out of town? So that takes away your ability to actually deliver your own full self or show your full potential at work. People assuming for you.
Mm-hmm.
And when people don't assume for you, and you do have those commitments outside of work, people also assuming that you're not able to bring your full self. You're not able to deliver a job because you need to leave early at 4 p.m. or you need to step out and come back for a reason. And that's changing. I say that because it's one step forward, 2 steps back sometimes, but there has to be an intentional effort by the organization to actually either show more women in leadership position, or acknowledge the fact that we are all well-rounded people. Our lives do not just revolve around work. We're able to balance everything. And the expectation of balance is not just for women, it's for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're single, if you're in a relationship or not, it doesn't matter what you are, you should be expected to balance things.
Yeah, and that's a real good example of when we're talking about equity and inclusion and how these two go together, right? So we have diversity at a lot of levels, right? But not necessarily equity and inclusion, which are the two important facets of racial justice. To think about, as you said, people in experiencing different identity markers, right? Being affected by them, and at the same time, the fact that we need to hear from them to know about those challenges. Otherwise, it's not possible. Funke, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think in the workplace, it's interesting. Like Abby said, there's always that lens that is put on women just from the get-go. In my experience, I remember there's times whereby maybe I've been passed on because someone said, I think you're going to be going on mat leave soon, and I don't think you'll be a good fit, right? Like, you literally hear some of those comments just because you're a woman, and that lens just automatically gets placed on you, not knowing whether that's something you want for yourself or not. People just make those assumptions and just assume you're less able to contribute, like Abby was saying, and your productivity gets judged by your gender, not necessarily the skill sets, the expertise that you bring to the table. And in my experience as well, as a Black woman, that even further marginalizes you as well. You're having to prove yourself twice as hard. There's times where people have asked me, they're looking at my resume and they're like, oh, so your education is from Africa? And I'm like, no, actually, all of my education is from Canada. So there's just multiple layers that just come with being in the workplace, and people second guess you sometimes. People doubt that you have the abilities and the skills just because of how you sound or how you look. That starts to, based on no real, facts in the workplace. And then scale that back to very demanding workspaces where it's really, maybe it's low paying, it's it's on the lower end, of the employment scale. Imagine those spaces and the barriers and the issues that could come up for women in those spaces. During COVID, we saw a lot of people in cultural communities, a lot of women who could not say no and had to show up to work just because they were scared if they didn't show up, they would lose their jobs, right? And it's that kind of mentality, it's that kind of stress. Imagine what that leads to, the kind of trauma that leads to in the workplace. You have high stress, toxic stress, but you still have to go there because you have to earn a living. So for most women, not all, but majority of women, especially cultural minority women, that's a reality every day. So there's lots of issues, maybe not one, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just at the beginning, basically, right? Just scratching the surface in a way of just hearing about some of those challenges and how people are being affected, people's lives and livelihoods, right, are being affected by these, and just knowing more about them. Because again, when we do not know what the problem is, we can't really solve that, right? So just making efforts to know more, I think is such an important point. And of course, Darlene, thanks for sharing. Education is another important factor there, right? What Dr. Salami is doing at U of A, we actually shared the resource last time in our link tree for those of you who were here. And just developing those resources, right? Educating younger women in the community who are experiencing racialization and how important it can be in order to advance them, right? So the next question that we have is, what can we do to help challenge gender stereotypes? We talked about that a little bit just now, right? That they exist. Just thinking about breaking the bias is telling us that those biases and stereotypes are very much around us. And so what do you think we can do as a community in order to challenge those stereotypes? Maybe we can go back to Adetoun.
I think we probably just need to be more intentional about occupying spaces. And I say that because I'll say it in two different perspectives now. From a political perspective, we've seen more organizations try to support more women to run for office, from the smallest city council to, whatever, just to either encourage women to realize that they can be in that position. It doesn't require a degree in political science or anything. And just really have them know that, this role requires a human being, full stop. It doesn't require a specific gender. And so having organizations that support more women like that would be great. For Black women, you're probably going to need even more encouragement and more support and, more leaning into whatever community they feel comfortable in to get them to participate, to get them to occupy those spaces that they would normally leave for everybody else. And this is the same for anything, quite frankly. Even in the startup world, there are some organizations and groups that I've been intentional about reaching out to or participating in just to get my voice heard. And it's been interesting that I would share some feedback and no one would have thought about it from that perspective. I remember there was we were brainstorming an idea for a new co-working space, and I said, well, I wanted to have babysitting or nanny services or childcare services, and everyone thought, oh, well, yeah, startup founders have kids too, men and women. So, really trying to put ideas in people's minds that they probably don't think about, and really bringing ourselves to those spaces so that we actually get our voices heard, get our opinions heard, and get things done.
Yeah.
It might take a while, but it's getting up there.
Yeah, very, very true. Just actively reaching out Right. I love this comment that we have here from Narlene, that, just initiatives coming from the community and sort of highlighting those needs could also be a sort of a force there, right? But then we definitely need that presence, that the community leaders, the people who are actually actively developing policy, right? Implementing policy and programs there as well. But yes, definitely, I think that's a very important point as well. Funke, how about you?
Sure, my mind is going in so many different directions. I read Darlene's comments and I was like, yes, oh yes, I can see you, Darlene, but it's like, you're amazing, amazing. And I'm going to talk about what Darlene, and what you shared, and then I'm going to circle back to Abby's points, because Abby made great points. The thing about it is, one of the things we're trying to do at Ribbon Rouge Foundation, and Ribbon Rouge Foundation focuses more on African Caribbean Black health equity. Whenever we go to funders and say, this is what the experiences of the community is, they're always like, going back to what Mansoure was saying, is where's the numbers? Where's the data, right? And that is the biggest struggle. Even when we know as women, this is what we need, or when we know this is what cultural communities need, funders will always ask us, where's the numbers, right? And unfortunately, we haven't always kept or collected those numbers, which is a whole different conversation, a whole different 1 hour conversation. Don't get me started on that, So it's always this circle, and we're always going back and forth with funders, right? And funders just always go with what is available, which is not always accessible to everyone. And there's biases in that, what is available right now. But circling back to what Abby was saying, in terms of, like, I was smiling when she was talking about looking for a new co-office space or something like that, and talking about, a space for a daycare. And what that just brought to my mind is, we also have to reimagine how we're socialized, for us to break down stereotypes, because really, and I mentioned this before, it's all about socialization. And that's what gets us to that point as adults, right? And we think, oh, no, this is how we're supposed to do things. Says who? Who made those laws? Do those laws or do those things fit for everybody? Do they actually fit for our reality right now, right? So I think one of the things I've seen in practice that has worked is just assessing people as humans first, not if they're whatever gender they are. So blind tests, invincible tests. If you're trying to get someone, hire someone, and I know the government of Canada implemented this some years ago. I didn't keep track. I don't know how well it's working. Where it's blind, you just send in your skills, your education. There's no names on it. There's no gender. There's nothing. And that's how they first shortlist people for jobs. Yeah. Like I said, I don't know if they're still doing that, but that is a way to just first meet the human. Not the man, not the woman, not the transgender, not the however they identify. Based on that, if this person matches what you're looking for. And then it's sort of like a blind test, right? So, and validating people for what they bring to the table versus what they look like, what they sound like, or how they identify. So I think that's one of the ways we can also, go over the hurdle of stereotypes.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the studies that have been done actually about, even names on resumes, right? And how that just unconsciously, subconsciously, right? This is bias we're talking about, and most often they are unconscious. And so they are just unconsciously putting them away, or they're not the ones that are selected to go up, right? Or get an interview even. So yes, by removing those, elements, detail from biography even at times, right? That would make the person second guess that applicant, right? May definitely help with that. Yeah, thanks so much. And to both of you, we have another comment from Joyce, who's also highlighting some other points: inequity in pay between genders, lack of subsidized childcare spaces, no accommodation of hours for shift workers, and expectation of women to deal with to deal more with childcare and chores, errands, traditional roles. And I think this came into spotlight, especially with COVID, when many had to work from home even, right? And so you could definitely see the struggle. I could see, for one, with my friends with little kids, right, how difficult it would be to manage that. And at the same time, you're of course expected to work on an acceptable, professional level, and how things become challenging that way, specifically for women. Because again, all those biases, right? All those expectations that are not just in men, right? This is ideology for everyone. Like, we are all affected by that, even though as women, we experience them more. But when it comes to biases, we're all affected by that. And so, yeah, these are things that definitely need a lot more work and attention when it comes to policymakers and community leaders. All right, so we can maybe move to our next question. And this is about COVID-19, right? And how, from your experience, from what you have learned, has impacted women's rights in Canada, in Alberta specifically, or around the world. So this is something that nowadays, whenever we are discussing marginalization, racialization, the idea of the limitations that we experienced from COVID are highlighted, right? So yeah, if anything comes to mind, please share with us.
I'm just going to start, if you don't mind, Abby.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was just going to say, you know what, Joyce just really helped summarize. I don't know, Joyce, if you saw the question before, but you literally just summarized some of the struggles that a lot of women face, especially during COVID, right? And Mansoura, you talked about it as well. And I was part of a research that last year, looking at the impacts of COVID-19 on cultural minority communities, and we saw a lot of risk factors that were present before COVID just get skyrocketed in cultural minority groups, especially for women. And we also found that women tend to work in not the safest situations or jobs, or have the safest employments. So there were situations where women still had to show up for work, even if they were sick, even if they had so many other things, on their plate. They couldn't afford to just say no, because they didn't feel like they had a choice to say no during COVID. And to your point, even during COVID, I have young children as well. You have to work from home. Sometimes you had to do schooling from home. You had to, be a mom, shop professionally. And one trend that I found, and recently I think we're all just getting really exhausted, is I started telling a lot of my colleagues, my staff, on Zoom meetings, I find women show up and say, you know what, sorry, today I'm having a bad hair day, or sorry, you know what, and I start to tell people, don't apologize, because so much is expected of women during COVID, right? And we're trying to keep up. And the mental toll that it's having on us, right? And I tell people, don't apologize. It's our reality. We're supposed to hold space for so many things and so many people, and yet we're expected to show up, as a business person, as an ED, I'm expected to show up, not just for my family, for my staff, for everybody. But what we were forgetting as women is also we're being impacted. Mm-hmm. Women were it was like we were outside of the pandemic, but no, we're inside of it as well. It's happening to us as well. So we need to be kind to each other. We need to remind each other that it's okay to not show up perfect, because so much was expected of us, and it's still expected of us as women across the globe, not just in Edmonton or in Canada as well.
Yeah, very true. Thank you, Funke. Adetoun, would you like to add?
No, I completely agree. And I think I want to say a little bit of a silver lining that we've seen there is we've seen some women decide that, they're not going to settle anymore. And we've seen them rise above, what was expected of them. We've seen women just, change their minds about, the situation they're in, especially in the home. We've seen women change careers because they've realized, you know what, this job is not the best for me. They don't have my best interest at heart. But it's a very small number of women. We still have the majority of women that, like Funke said, they don't even realize the impact that COVID has had on their mental health just yet, because we're still going through it, right? We're trying to get over it, but we're still going through it. And, as a woman, every time you're not doing something, or when you are doing something, you're thinking about something. As a mother, you're thinking about your kids and what you're doing tomorrow and what's planned. And now you're going to think about the impact of COVID and how that's going to affect you. So you've just kind of multiplied all the things you're thinking about and just put a heavy burden on yourself even more. So I think for me, I want to see this. I want to see the impact of COVID as maybe the thing women need to strengthen themselves and get out of the, I want to say, the funk that they probably just settled with. They're just so used to it. It's just they just get on with it. And I'm hoping that for some women, or for most women, they get to that point where it's perfect, like Cheryl said, they don't take the abuse anymore. They're done with it, or they follow that dream of that education that they always wanted, or they get help for with their kids, and they do more. They chase their dreams a little bit more, because now they just kind of realize that this rat race, it needs to end.
Yeah, you're right, and that's an important step, right? To just identify that and see that that is possible, right? So when we're talking about representation, that's why it's so important, because unless you see that in front of you, right, being practiced, growing up, that's the ideology. If you see women in those leadership positions, if you see women as being treated equally, right, or equitably in this case, there will be more room for improvement and for seeing an alternative situation for yourself. But you are right in saying that not a lot of women can or afford that, right, to just basically showing up to work or doing what is needed just because they cannot get out of that. And again, going back to the fact that when we're talking about racialized women, we are not just talking about one barrier or one intersection, right? We're talking about so many. And if you add something like lower economic status to the mix, you are confronted with a lot of women in the workforce, right, that do not have the choice, even though they may start to realize that there are other options. But again, so many of those factors, right? Funke suggested the fact that things may be available but not accessible, right? Adetoun suggested as well that yes, there were things. As someone who was doing a startup, I had no idea, right? We did not know about those resources. So again, accessibility becomes an important thing as well. And Cheryl is also talking about schooling at home, that was originally basically something that was expected from women and mothers. Absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you. Great points. And then the next question, or the next thing we would like to invite you to talk a little bit about here is some success stories. We have invited our speakers today because of the successful women that they are in our community. And then we would like to hear about any highlights, any achievements, anything that you would like to share with us, whether it's a project, whether it's the barriers you overcame to be here today, right? Feel free to talk about that for us in the time that remains. So maybe we can start with Adetoun.
I think, for us, and I say us because I'm a co-founder of Clavis Studio, for us, our success was really just launching. We launched last year, and we had just such a great support system around us. Friends referred friends. They bought things, and then the icing on the cake was just when we won. We won several awards. So the first award that we won was from Business Link. They thought our pitch competition was great, and then we won Most Promising Startup. So it felt like some sort of validation that we were on the right path. But it also felt good that people were using our platform, and people understood what we were trying to do with the platform. And I think, even as we go on over the next few months now, we're going to open up the platform so that other people can use the platform. So I'll bring it back a little bit so people are not lost. Clave Studio is an online design platform. So it allows you to decorate your home without having to carry around tape measures and buy chairs and return chairs and things like that. So when we launched the platform to help people design. And then, we got a lot of feedback where people needed more help, or people said, well, how do I even get started? And then, with the success we had projections for revenue last year that we met, which is amazing with COVID. With the success that we had, we were able to roll out phase 2 of our project, which is now opening up the platform to other designers. So we're not just the only ones using the platform anymore. Any designer or design enthusiast can use the platform and, design for their own clients out there. And it's a little bit more open that way. So I feel like, we've fast-tracked our this project a little bit more just because of the success we had last year. This we weren't planning for until Q3 this year. And we're about to launch it by the end of this month. So we're excited about that. We're excited about having a B2B platform now where people can log on and create portfolios and share and, and earn revenue that way. And I think over the next few months or a few years, as we start to get more usage, get more revenue, get more attention, I would not forget just how much the network and the resources around us help. And this is why it's so important for me, for women or any startup founder. When I meet them, I'm always willing to share information and just help them get everything they need to get started.
Yeah, women empowering women, right?
That's
Great.
right.
Thanks so much for sharing, Adetoun. Funke, would you like to highlight some of your work for us?
Sure. This is always the hardest thing for me to do ever, actually, because I think for me, it's been a privilege to walk this journey, to walk this path. I'm reading Cheryl's comments and my mind's just going in so many different places because I've been that person who's walked alongside people on the darkest days and where they felt like there was nothing else. But what people don't understand is that just as they give to you, or you think you're giving to them, they've also given to me. So to highlight my achievements, it's just been a privilege. It's just been a blessing to just learn from people in every space I found myself. Just being in the social services. And one thing, we touched very briefly on race-based data today. And one of the issues we've always had is, especially for cultural minority racialized people, is government agencies saying, show us the data. So at Ribbon Ridge Foundation, we're actually launching a project where it's called the Black Equity in Alberta's Rainforest. And we're going to show them the data for the ACB community in Alberta. So what that means is we're trying to collect evidence-based data about connections and experiences of African Caribbean Black people in Alberta in terms of connecting with systems, some of the systems that have been highlighted in the chat, in housing, in justice, mental health, healthcare. It's a big project that we're undertaking, but at the end of the day, we're going to go back to funders and say, this is the data and this is why you need to fund what we say the issues are, not the issues you think should be funded. So and that's why I said we don't need to, if we go into the data conversation, don't get me started on that, but that's always been a gap. And the hope is that we're going to close that gap somewhat with this project that we're going to be undertaking at the Ribbon Ridge Foundation. So yeah, that's one of the highlights that I can just share with you right now. And I'm so excited. And what we believe, one of the critical issues about data race-based data has also been ownership. And when everyone asks me, who owns this research? The community owns the research. We have signed a collaborative agreement that states that communities have access, direct access, not ribbon rouge, not the researchers, but the communities own the data. Because when communities own their own data, then that's more powerful versus, the systems own the data and they can use it and misuse it and interpret as they so fit. Because data is also context informed, and taking out of context can be very harmful, which we've seen in the past. And that's why it was stopped in the first place. It used to be collected, was used for harmful reasons, and it was stopped. And now for us to go back to that place and minimize harm, communities need ownership of their own data.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And that's amazing, right? What you're doing in that project. And that's a way, I think, as I think it was Darlene, if I'm not mistaken, who was talking about these initiatives, right? And how sometimes people are like, well, we don't have, those resources in the government to do that, right? The people who need to run those, research projects or surveys, etc. But what maybe we do not think about that well is the resources we have in the community, right? The nonprofit organizations, all these initiatives that could be set up, right? Could be funded, could be supported in order to do the work that, just even if it is in smaller communities, right? You're still trying to gather that data, to gather what's happening in the community, what are the needs in the community, right? And there are experts in different organizations who can help with this project if there is proper, funding available and resources available, right? Thanks so much. Great to hear about these success stories. So we have a couple minutes left. If you have any final words for us, please feel free to share. I don't see any other questions here. I think we answered most of them. But yeah, please, if you would like to share a final thought with us.
I think it's gonna be a shameful plug because I volunteer with the Women's Advocacy Voice of Edmonton, and I think I want to encourage more women to run for office. It doesn't matter what kind of position it is. It doesn't matter what level. Please run. It's your opinion matters. Your voice matters. Whatever it is that you think, you feel about something, there are a number of women that feel the same way. There's a percentage of women that want to see what you want to see as well. I feel like that would be a great way to get more women participating and more women's voices heard, especially BIPOC women.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much, Adetoun. And Funke.
Yes, you know what? I completely agree with Abby. I think for me, that's something that has stayed with me. Just thinking about International Women's Day, it's also more women in leadership. It can be a lonely place. I look at myself now as a leader in some right? But it's also a very lonely place for women, and especially BIPOC women. So the more of us who can link arms, we talk about the issues most times and the gaps, right? But who's in the room fixing those gaps and those issues also determine how they'll be fixed at the end of the day. So when more of us from different perspectives, from different intersections are in that room or at that table, definitely we'll be able to sort of close the gaps because we bring different perspectives, different experiences to that table. So please, I encourage more women, reach out to women in leadership. I'm always open. Abby is open as well. Reach out to us, and then we can always support one another. So, I'm hoping that more women would even, transcend some of the work that we're already starting and we're doing as well. So yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, at this point, I would like to thank our speakers for generously sharing their time with us, and also everyone who joined us in this session. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation, and please share your feedback with us. I shared a link with you in the chat box, but there will be also a link sent to you after this session. So please share those comments and suggestions and your feedback, so that we can improve our program as well. And again, the QR code is available on this page. If you would like to learn more about International Women's Day, the women's initiatives, feel free to scan them or share links with us so we can add to our link tree. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.